Hi everybody and welcome to Cologne for we're now fourth day of our safety week. It's been such a busy week, it's easy to forget. We're now on the fifth session for CAMOs and maintenance organisations. We've got a really practical session lined up for you, so hopefully you'll learn a lot and get some really interesting insights from our panellists on some of the maintenance challenges they're facing at the moment. My name's John Franklin. I'm head of safety promotion at EASA, and I'm joined here in our mini studio by my colleague Jean-Pierre Arnaud, who's one of our safety management experts.
Thank you very much for joining this session.
Jean-Pierre has been instrumental in helping us organise the Safety Week here. Just to give you a quick introduction, if you weren't already aware, so we launched this Ramp Up, Be Ready, Stay Safe campaign back at the end of May, with a package of material to help organisations really prepare for the ramp up. If you go to our EASA Air Ops community, there's a Ramp Up, Be Ready, Stay Safe campaign page. From there, you can then select the different domains. So there's a specific kind of section for maintenance organisations. And there you can find all the different COVID-related resources from EASA and other organisations as well. We've got lots of kind of organizational tips and actions that you can perhaps help you think about during your own ramp up. We've also then got some domain specific ramp up type actions and activities. And again, there's a whole section there for the maintenance side of things. Then we've got the information on the domain safety issues, some safety posters and other stuff. So lots of different material, and they're all designed kind of white branded. So particularly there's some presentations that you can download, add your logos to. You know, they're not EASA copyright. We just want to get it out there and give you information you can turn around and use as quickly as possible, knowing that things are so tough at the moment. Now, we've had quite a busy safety week this week. We've been focusing particularly in all the different domains on skills and knowledge degradation, and we'll carry that theme on this week, this session as well. We're also going to talk a little bit about recovery and bringing aircraft back out of storage, and hopefully you'll find that interesting. So I'm going to hand over now to my colleague Luis Perez. Luis, over to you.
Okay, thank you very much, John. Good morning, everybody. I must say that I'm honored to be the moderator for the maintenance session of the post-COVID-19 ramp-up safety week. Be ready and stay safe. This is the motto of this week. I promise a very, very interesting session that will make even our colleagues from the other sessions a little bit jealous. So in the context of the post-COVID-19 ramp-up, EASA published an updated review of safety issues, version 2, to support the industry in the preparations for an increase in flying activity over the coming months. Organizations should then evaluate those safety issues and, where applicable, capture them in their respective management systems. The document is accessible under the link that is visible in the slide. Particularly relevant for our maintenance activities, I would like to refer, for example, the effect of biocides on aircraft systems and structural components, skills and knowledge degradation due to the lack of recent practice, which have been already mentioned as one transversal issue. Risk assessment based on previous normal operations no longer valid, and the scale of aircraft storage and subsequent discharge may lead to technical failures when the aircraft are returned to service. So, to help industry to tackle these safety issues, EASA made available a set of useful resources, from guidance material to collaborative articles to SIVs, safety information bulletins, to safety directives. And you can find all those resources under the link that is posted in the slide. You have specific collaborative articles about skills and knowledge degradation and about risk assessments based on previous normal operations that are not longer valid. You have guidelines about the storage of aircraft and return to service of aircraft after storage, which it's a really nice one it gives a lot of information. And you also, I'd like to draw the attention also for the SIV 2014 with regards to covering the PITO static issues after storage of aircraft due to COVID-19 pandemic. So this session will specifically focus, as already mentioned, in those two items: skills and knowledge degradation in the operational workforce and bringing aircraft back from storage during the ramp up. We will consider some practical challenges that aircraft maintenance organizations and continuing airworthiness management organizations are facing at this stage of the crisis. Again, particularly with regards to those two items, and what this means in terms of specific practical problems. What specific experience does each operator have? How have they talked about this challenge with their staff, and what action solutions have been implemented? So, without further delay, it's my pleasure to introduce the panel members for this session. Very interesting composition. I start with David Wind from German Ways, Director of Technical Operations. We have Svein Albertusson from Icelandair, Manager Technical Support. We have Melly Demir from Airbus, Parking and Storage Multifunctional Team Leader. And the last but not the least, Raj Jagbunda from KLM, Director of Line Maintenance International. So I hope you enjoy this session. So back to you, John, for the presentation from David. I will stop sharing my screen now.
Thanks very much, Lewis. And while I'm just getting David's presentation up, there's just a couple of kind of housekeeping things perhaps also to mention on the with the WebEx. So if you've got any questions to ask, there's at the bottom right, there's 3 dots. You should be able to launch a Q&A box on the WebEx. So if you could use that Q&A to ask questions, then it makes our management a little bit easier of the questions, and we can save them afterwards. So we do encourage you to ask any questions you have for the panelists in that box there. So if you could do that, that would be great. And yeah, David, over to you.
Okay, thanks, John. Well, good morning, ladies and gentlemen. It's a pleasure and a privilege to be able to take part in this event today. German Airways, we're definitely the little guys in this group. Our fleets are minute in comparison to others, but I think some of the challenges and experiences we've gained in the last 18 months are quite common. And I think this is we've looked forward to and put a bit of work into the preparation to share our experiences and looking to gain also looking at the best practice experience from other operators that we can coming together and working together and identifying and tackling our common challenges. Okay, so I guess we can go straight into the presentation, John. Next slide. Won't get too much into the introduction. That's not really required in that sense, but maybe a little background with German Airways. We were formerly known as WDL Aviation. During the pandemic, we changed names. We've introduced, we're a classic ACMI charter airline, transitioning from BA Systems, BA 146's Avrojets into Embraer E190s over the last several years. Despite our small size, we have our own CAMO, we have our own AMO, and line base maintenance capabilities. So we're sort of a unique small island where there's very little third-party outsourcing. Okay, next slide. So a little bit about the background. I don't know how everyone's experience was going into the pandemic. I plotted it out based on the graph that you'll see in the next few charts. Basically starting at January 2020 and taking us through to today, and a prognosis based on our planning data to date. And what we're looking at is really, when I looked at the chart, it's a roller coaster. We didn't know, or who knew in February or March just what was going to happen. And it was very interesting when we put this together to look at it graphically, because each time we had sort of a phase change in this, we had to reconsider our operational challenges, our operational requirements, and prepare to deal with the circumstances, but also to deal with how are we going to ramp up, how are we going to keep the personnel and capabilities and resources in place, and how are we also have to, at the end of the day, commercially, it has to work as well. So as we got onto this, as we all unintentionally or got on this roller coaster back in March of 2020, we were faced directly with the questions: how are we going to deal with it? With all the shutdowns and lockdowns, it's very difficult to plan. We had to make a decision fairly early on: are we going to park, store, go to the desert, or just go low? Our decision was made to go to low utilization, focusing on charter work, the flights, and the work that we could continue to operate to do as much retainment of proficiency as possible in the organization. This, of course, kept us quite a challenge in the sense that forecasting and planning of maintenance, manpower, equipment. It's the classic, for many years, how many hours and cycles do you operate an aircraft? Suddenly, those statistics don't work anymore for your planning. So we had to deal with the uncertainties. Okay, next slide. Okay, a little bit about the challenges that we faced. Again, being a CAMO and a maintenance organization, there was two different sides. The first one that started opening up only months into it is suddenly the widening gaps in maintenance. The clock keeps ticking. The flight hours and the flight cycles are not being gathered the way they were normally planned for, and this meant that we had to do scenario planning. CAMO was very busy at first, coming up with planning the events. The production planning in the AMO was equally as a challenge. For every scenario, we had to come up with a realization plan, and it wasn't just 1, 2, or 3, and it hasn't stopped. It continues today because we're looking at it looks like we're coming out of COVID, but we have no idea what Delta is going to do to us. So we have to, we're still considering, and we are still looking at the scenario plans. For us, was also a very important part of this to keep the team. We're a smaller organization. I have 27 people in my AMO and CAMO together. We're more of a family in some ways, and the focus is we have to keep the team healthy. We have to keep them proficient, employed, and be ready for the restart. And that gave us, when we looked into it and we started reflecting back on it, we actually had management of change, which is well established in our safety management operations and department in the organization. The management of change, we also realized that we have an awful lot of human factor related items, which also included change management aspects, which are not, which we hadn't had placed as much of a focus on as we've done over the pandemic. And really, when we were looking at that curve and that graph at the top, and we started reflecting and preparing this presentation, and in preparing the presentation, it gave us a chance to look back over the last year and a half and realize that there were some things that we were doing that we didn't even realize we were doing. And that we defined it as the 5 R's. First, at the top of descent in March, we had to start realizing what was going on. We had to assess the situation, and the key word is accept the situation and circumstances. So a clear understanding of what challenges we faced. Then we started reflecting, what feasible options we had. Feasible being the key word on that. And then we came to a reset because we knew we had to start adjusting and changing things. And the key word on this one is agree and take action. Agree in the sense that there might be agreements we need to make on a commercial front. There might be agreements we need to make with the unions. There might be agreements we need to take with the competent authorities. All of these things have to be understood, agreed, and then enacted. And then we very quickly go into a point of reflection, because some things worked, some things didn't work as we intended. The market was very dynamic and changing, and that puts us back into a correction opportunity. And then looking at to rebuild and restructure, because coming out of this, we realize we're going to be a different operation. Our market will likely be different. And not just rebuilding, it may be restructuring actions required in our overall group to be ready to not just restart, but restart into the new world. Okay, next slide. So actions taken. We had a unique COVID. Well, I think all of us in the operating environment had a unique COVID risk because home office is sometimes limited, particularly in the AMO. Some of the CAMO staff can work from home, but it's pretty tough to keep an aircraft operating and having your engineers at home. So there is an awful lot of increased manpower planning to minimize the exposure to risk that is continuing to ongo today. Even down to the manner and the amount that we test internally to try to prevent any breakouts or events inside of our organization, which could have an impact on our manpower and our resource to fulfill our operations. Again, at the same time, we had to look at scalability because that roller coaster wave, we had to scale up and scale down in certain areas, whether that be spares, components, human resources, but also be ready for a quick restart. Again, that then starts introducing other challenges when you are putting staff on furlough. How long are they on furlough? How do we deal with skill loss and shift? And a number of things that we started doing on that was staff rotation between our line and base activities. I put an increased focus on the task training, essentially using our existing CAT-A staff task training program and reintroducing it as a form of recurrent training. Mentorship and the buddy system, however, were the most effective, where we were then teaming up individuals as they were to ensure that the competency was in place. A few other little points, looking at to manage through the times of what other revenue inputs and services we can work with, and the synergies with other local operators, looking at cost reductions, and it allowed us and many other operators to start looking at things not just as what do we need in our own operation, but what do we all have, but perhaps we can share. Okay, next slide. So now coming back out and ramping up, and also during these phases, there's a number of things that have been challenges for us. Standard consumables, we've noted this as early as a half a year ago, that things that used to be off-the-shelf products from a variety of vetted vendors may have long lead times. We were quite surprised the first time a standard grease was available in 18 weeks. So these become challenges to ensure that we have all of the required and OEM specified consumables in place. Previous supply data, again, because some manufacturers had ramped down production of things. Where you had always gotten things inside of a week may not be the case anymore. Brexit hit us right at the beginning of the year as well. Previously, we had a very reliable, dependable UK group of suppliers. And suddenly, the import costs, the transportation times, the overheads made it a challenge to be able to continue to use them. And now, towards as the ramp up and looking as we're adding line operations, the stage call up and recalibration of tools and equipment. These have been processed. We tackled these early, but it's something get quite often get overlooked on the ramp up, that things that we didn't require would be put into quarantine. But now as we ramp up, we have to make sure we get them all calibrated and back ready for service, and there may not be the capacity on the market to handle things as fast as you'd like them. Moving into KPIs and also our safety performance indicators, we discovered quite quick that the classics that we were measuring ourselves against may not be applicable anymore. We looked at our KPIs, and actually we definitely went into the safety, the SPIs, and redefined them for this case. Then we discover as well, particularly in an operation of our size, we don't have the data pool. We're not operating enough flights, hours, and cycles. Our data, reliability data is skewed. The maintenance and the PREPs, the ratio is quite different. And then we're seeing the storage and low utilization influences that we need to factor in, but also isolate from our data to understand them correctly. The human factors, proficiency and skill fade. In the first bout where we had furloughed a number of employees and we were able to bring them back for base maintenance activities fairly quickly, there was a skill gap. There was a fade in proficiencies, and it wasn't necessarily a fade in proficiencies based on that someone had forgotten how to do the tasks. It was also that we realized we had to pick up our employees, and in the time that maybe someone was off for several months, you might have had a CAMO change, you might have had an MOE update, you may have had many other technical documentations, you may have had IT changes. And you had to ensure that the staff were up to speed on everything that happened since the last day and the last working system that they were in. Again, the human factors, looking at current and new joiners, competency and recency. We've got some good AMC and guidance material to go against, and that's been helpful for us. Reactivation and reintegration of furloughed staff. There's two scenarios there. It's one thing, what have they missed? But also, quite often the furloughed staff that are being called back in may not be, generally the B1s and the B2s were kept working in the AMO, but the Cat A's were furloughed. That gives us more flexibility in the operation, but now those that have a lower wage rate are the ones that have had to stay home, had the furlough impacts, and the reintegration into the workplace. The A's and the B's have done all the work and have had to work double duty, and the Cat A's come back in, and there can be a little bit of a rough entry there because we have to deal with some human factors there as well. Perceptions of what is fair and what is not fair can play a part of this. And then tagging it into the other, and I think everybody understands the fatigue and weariness that have resulted of going through the pandemic. Good. Manpower planning, something we had to add also into, and we're reflecting it as well as today. Something we did not at the onset realize was going to be as big was the use of flying spanners, because technical support at certain outstations wasn't available. Corona testing requirements for our staff, and the quarantine time returning from travel or flying spanner work. Actually, for us, it hit 12% I was losing in quarantine time at one point in time due to my flying spanners of resource. So that needs to go back into the resource manpower planning. Okay, next slide. Okay, tools available, management of change and change management. All of these different little things that we've seen in our small operation. We looked. What criteria can we use? What tools can we use to help us ask the right questions, to challenge our decisions, to establish barriers and mitigations? And we came back up that we were always using certain portions of the dirty dozen. Very classic, but applying the questions that we see in the dirty dozen and the warnings has helped us make our decisions and really challenge our thought process when we're analyzing what could happen as we make adjustments in our organization. Following on to that, I guess if there was a mission statement now as a closing statement to my presentation, it's a problem. It's a shame to take a problem and not you turn it into an opportunity. And I think we see coming out of COVID is it's an opportunity to introduce and improve processes, training, efficiencies, and safety promotion inside the AMO and inside of our maintenance organization and our CAMO. It'd be a shame that if we come out of this and we haven't had the opportunity to improve. So that's the end of my presentation. It's a bit of a different one than the next one's coming up. Again, perhaps because we're a small operator and we're, we don't have levels of hierarchy we all have to work together on all the challenges day in, day out.
Okay, thank you very much, David. Very interesting presentation, and the beauty of this panel composition is diversity. So we gain with that the diversity. So I particularly like the picture of a roller coaster, which helps to better understand the impact of the different pandemic waves in the operator like German ways. I also found very interesting the 5 hours pattern, kind of new perspective, mixed with the classical dirty dozen. So you made reference to the proficiency or skills fade in an unexpectedly short period of time. Could you please explain in a few words how German ways address this issue and what mitigation actions were put in place to address it?
Certainly, Louis. Yes, we there was at the very onset, we were lucky in many ways that the skill fade was somewhat limited because we went into prolonged parking and went into low utilization with the small team. The skill fade that we saw was primarily combated, or the barriers mitigations, by buddying up, by putting 2 engineers onto a task where we would usually leave it to a single engineer for the completion. Again, it was changing our resource plan to put more manpower onto the tasks than you would normally plan under regular circumstances to ensure that those gaps don't emerge. Again, a barrier and a mitigation. And it's not just in the proficiency fade. In many ways, is not so much task related. It's when we all learn to ride a bicycle, and we haven't ridden one for 10 years. When we get back on, we can still ride, but we're just wobbly. Exactly. So we don't have to go back to the basics. We just need to top up on the finer things. And quite often in the change, it may be that if someone's been off for 2 or 3 months, they've missed procedural changes in the organization. So at that point of re-entry, we have to make sure that we've reviewed and gone through with that team member what has changed since they've been off work. Do we have IT changes? Do they have new logins? Have we changed our safety management system and logins? There's been lots of little changes that go on, and we did need to make sure that it's not just here, read and sign. We were on this journey together.
Okay, thank you, David. So back to you, John, for the next presentation from Svein Albertsson, Icelandair.
Perfect. Thanks, Lewis. So I've just put your presentation up. So away you go.
Yeah, thank you. Can you hear me well, guys?
Yep. Perfect. Thanks.
Yes. My name is Svein Albertsson, Manager Technical Support at Icelandair. Yeah, I think we want to get right into the good stuff. Can you put the next slide up? Yeah. A little bit of background. We had 37 aircrafts operating before COVID. We have our own CAMO and maintenance organization. We have DOA approval, and we tackle all kinds of DOA projects. We provide CAMO services to third-party airlines and do a lot of our maintenance in Keflavik. We have great capabilities here, shops, and very self-sufficient operation. But when COVID came, we had limited knowledge and experience in aircraft storage. So it was a new game to us. So we really had to dive in and learn about it. Of course, we were operating the MAX before COVID, so we had some experience in storage, but definitely limited. So next slide, please. Before talking, we were talking about ramp up and entry to service. We definitely have to talk about entry into storage. That was a great challenge. Of course, it happened all so fast. So we are definitely struggling with putting the aircraft into storage. We did not have any maintenance storage program set up in the computer system, and really the AMM storage program was not really applicable to the environmental conditions here in Keflavik, almost Arctic and definitely marine environment. So it was not in our favor. Anyway, due to the circumstances, we had to act fast and we definitely had to do a lot of changes to the storage program. I needed to do multiple amendments and try different methods. Next slide, please. So we definitely learned that when storing aircraft here, the key was the follow-up. Of course, the storage program mandates a weekly and bi-weekly follow-ups, but we needed more. So we added to the program. We are frequently towing aircraft into the hangar and inspecting the aircraft. We installed humidity monitors in the engines and cabins and E&Es, and we're monitoring the humidity, and we did frequent wash and APU runs more frequently than required. So we definitely realized that was kind of the key. We also had few aircraft in low utilization. Every now and then that we saw a degradation in the condition, and we try to act as much as possible. But we always experience the roller coaster ride, like David mentioned, and so we are familiar with those challenges. Next slide. So when we obviously realized that COVID wasn't going anywhere anytime soon, and the summer was about to end, we decided to relocate the aircraft that had been stored in Keflavik. We realized that the environmental condition had a great effect on the condition of the aircrafts. So we started to look southbound and relocate the aircraft to Roswell and Leita in Spain. So that actually gave us some experience in ramping up or returning the aircraft to serviceable condition and airworthy. Of course, we are not familiar with all of the consumable material and so on that requires, as mentioned in the maintenance manual for storage. So that gave us a good experience in getting the aircraft ready. But we also realized that storing the aircraft abroad and in different locations that meant more complex oversight and more planning. So that was a challenge that we needed to tackle. We also had aircraft here in Keflavik and both active and long-term storage and so on. So those are definitely challenges. Next slide. Talking about the Icelandic team, the employees, this was definitely a difficult year, probably one of the most difficult years we had. Of course, we experienced layoffs and financial difficulties and COVID restrictions like everyone. and it definitely has a great impact on the mental status of the team. We saw clear signs of fatigue, strain and fatigue in the employee team, and basically I would say some people have been flying on the reserve fuel for last month. So that's definitely a concern going into the ramp up that we really had to discuss. But we also, I would say, realized that having a plan, sharing as much information as available is very helpful for the employees. And if you don't know what's coming up, you have to tell people that you don't actually know that. I believe that helps. It was a concern that the training or degradation in training and but we always were operating the aircrafts. We were always operating the 75 and 76. Of course, we need to retrain people for the 737 MAX after the prolonged grounding we experienced, but that's been a factor as well. So next slide. So talking about return to service, we had, as mentioned before, ramp-up plan included ramp-ups on multiple locations. That was not necessarily bad. We had multiple teams working on the aircraft, made us so we could even ramp up faster with multiple locations, multiple teams. But that demanded a good plan, that we needed to have good conversation with all the employees and third-party MROs. And a speedy ramp-up can definitely involve into pressure on the employees, pressure on both maintenance and CAMO personnel. So that's definitely a risk factor. Talking about physical conditions and findings out of storage, probably the most common factor is corrosion. We had to mention something: engine inlet corrosion, thrust reverser, landing gears, cockpit window frames. To mention some of the issues we have been tackling. Of course, we had some electrical issues and hydraulic fuel leaks and so on, like everybody, but the corrosion was probably the biggest factor. We decided early on that we wanted to perform a maintenance check flight after storage on all the aircraft, and that has helped us greatly. Every time we perform maintenance check flight after storage, we experience multiple errors and faults, usually minor, and that gave us opportunity to adjust the aircraft and correct and avoided definitely multiple unnecessary flight disruptions and passenger inconvenience, definitely. So I would definitely recommend that if possible. So next slide.
Stop. Oh, you could be kidding me.
So we have been looking into in-service issues since we have actually got a pretty good size of our fleet flying.
And then you cannot.
John, I can hear you.
Oh, sorry.
That's all right.
Technical.
Yeah, it's all right. And we have been seeing that increased usage higher the reliability rate and technical dispatch reliability rate. We have not detected any obvious failure trend that is common to the fleet. It's basically depends on the individual aircraft, but common failures, in-service failures after storage are like minor electrical issues, bulb and indication, minor leaks and streaks, and something like that. So definitely we cannot say that we have a trend that we are concerned of. So far, so good, I would say. I believe that's all. Yeah, thank you very much, guys.
Okay, thank you, Svein. It was a very interesting overview of Iceland main challenges and with regards to storage aircraft due to the COVID-19 pandemic situation. What attracted my attention in this presentation was the need to put multiple aircraft to storage at different locations, which means more complex oversight and planning.
Mhm.
You also mentioned that follow-up is the key to successful storage.
Mhm.
So could you please explain in a few words, how did you ensure the follow-up of your fleet stored in different places, and what the challenge you were or are facing during the storage of your fleet?
Mhm. So if we talk about the follow-up, we definitely seen that the worse condition the aircraft is stored in, the more follow-up is needed. So storing an aircraft in the desert requires less follow-up. That's obvious to us. If moisture and rain and water pours in somewhere, you definitely need to do something. So you can't just wait. We definitely were struggling with keeping the humidity down inside the engines. So we tried multiple ways of plastic covering and tape. So because we were struggling with keeping the requirements set forth in the maintenance manual, we were able to monitor that with humidity monitors and installed dehumidifiers and so that requires definitely a lot of follow-up. And paying attention to details like plastic coverings and so on, inspecting for early corrosion, adding corrosion inhibiting compound, that's definitely a key. As I mentioned, when you're storing at difficult locations, and that's basically why we decided to relocate the fleet, the majority of the fleet, to avoid that. Not having to there was so much effort that needed to keep the aircraft in storage like that. And as I mentioned in the presentation, that it is a challenge to store the aircraft in multiple locations. You have to rely on maintenance organization on site. And due to COVID, we were unable to have employees at those sites as well. Created some issues definitely, but nothing that we couldn't handle. But yeah.
Okay, thank you, Svein,
Thank
for
you.
your answer and for your presentation. Back to you, John. But just to for the attendees, we are receiving your questions and we are looking at them. And we, in order to avoid, let's say, delays between the presentations, we will pose those questions to the different panelists in the end of the session of presentations. Okay, back to you, John.
Fantastic. Thanks very much, Lewis. So I'll just put Noameli's presentation from Airbus. Hopefully, so apologies for the slight technical problem there, where I'm trying to move on the slides. It's exactly where new emails pop up on my screen. So I've moved it now. So I've removed my potential failure condition for the next session. So Meli, here's your presentation. Thanks very much.
Hello, good morning again. Also from my side, my name is Meli Demir, and I'm working within Airbus and leading the parking and storage activities in Airbus to support all our Airbus customers. So we continue the slide. We'll give you a brief introduction about what happened on parking and storage since last year, and then next steps and quick ramp up in a conclusion. Then you can go to the next slide, please. So what happened so far in December 2019, we had the information, or everybody saw that pandemic was announced somehow. And We had been in touch with some Asian customers in that frame until March 2020 to support them with few grounding topics. Then in March 2020, there was this massive grounding for all the aircraft across the world when the borders have been closed. Their Airbus management has decided to build a multifunctional team in order to find solution, pragmatic, flexible solution. What Sven just mentioned as well, with all the different locations where the aircraft has been grounded, there was no maintenance staff available or resources available to perform a maintenance check on the aircraft, to perform the induction to parking and storage. So we needed to really concentrate on a quick solution to support you to keep the aircraft airworthy, to perform the minimum activities on the aircraft. That's why we concentrate at the beginning really on the entry into storage, entry into parking conditions, and then to try to give you as much as possible flexibility on that one. Now, a year later or 1.5 years later, we all thought that it will not take that long time. If you click one time, please. Then we saw, okay, we need to focus on different topics. So in between now we focus on storage procedures, optimization, as the pandemic is taking longer than expected, and we still have a lot of aircraft on ground, so thousands of aircraft are still not flying and will not fly within 2022. And also what has been also introduced within this multifunctional team is to find a smooth return to service support to all the customers who had deviated in between because of these resource issues up to now. So, and we also support this kind of non-revenue flight, what Sven mentioned, the maintenance check flight. We have also the recommendation for all the Airbus aircraft after parking or storage period to perform it, and here we support as well these activities. Additionally, what was mentioned by the two other guys before, with the support from for all the additional parts, spare parts, consumables. We had been in touch also with all our suppliers to find solutions quickly, that there is no break in between the supply chain. So if we go to the next slide, please. And during the smooth return to service, we try to anticipate and monitor the situation overall. So what we did is really to track the questions we do receive within Airbus, and also to monitor what's going to happen. It was not only the questions coming from the airlines, it was also our field services who are very closely in touch with the airlines, and with them we try to identify the issues, and our SMS, our safety management system, is in place within Airbus, and they are connected every week with our MFT to analyze the output, if there is some need to take some action. And here we have recently introduced now a return to service checklist, which will be published in the Airbus AMO to support again the customer to cross-check before entering to service that all required steps from the AMO has been performed, and this we consider as a support function out of the SMS. Next slide, please. Once more, please. Yes. And well, just to give you some examples, during the parking and storage event, we had also some findings. If you click one more time, typical findings are like birds, insects in the aircraft in different holes. Recently, we have seen snakes as well around the tires because it's cool over there in the desert, so they choose that location. However, we have also seen corrosion in dedicated areas. Here we start to mitigate in between already to publish articles or ISIs in service information letter to share where to add some temporary components to secure these areas. And we have seen with the batteries that the capacity will be reduced if they are on the aircraft, and that's why we have also shared the information to treat the batteries differently. And also one important topic is the extended cannibalization. It's understandable that airlines are taking parts out of the aircraft. This is not recommended during storage and parking periods. However, we all know industry standard-wise this is happening. That's why we recommend to get back to us in that frame to analyze if there is any impact on any system, because you cannot perform all periodic ground checks in that frame. So next slide, please. One click more, please. Yes, and as mentioned, we have this regional calls from different parts of the area on a weekly basis. So we do get the information from Asia's APAC region, China, Middle East, Africa, Americas, Europe, and all are connected to the multifunctional team. And over there, we have more than 20 teams connected really to find the solutions and to analyze the ongoing issues. And just for information, we have shared more than 1,700 solutions in between. Up to now, we had a lot of webinars and also updated the aircraft maintenance manual, depending on the experience we have gained as well in the pandemic situation. Next slide. And for your information, we are summarizing all the output in a monthly parking, storage, and return to service summary letter, which is shared with all the Airbus operator. And normally you should have access through Airbus World or through your field service team. You can request that and you would receive a copy. And it's well done summary with all the proposals, how to mitigate and how to avoid issues at return to service. Slide, please. So just to conclude, so we will continue to support the operator as much we can during this critical situation. So it was new for all of us, and we concentrate on a smooth return to service and long-term solutions now. But we keep in touch with you to get the best solution in this frame to get back safely to the air. So thanks a lot. So that was my part, and if you have questions, let us know.
Okay, thank you very much, Melly. It was a very interesting concept presented by you with regards to return to service optimization, namely the three referred items like anticipation, monitoring, and supporting, in the introduction of checklists for return to service. So also the monthly publication of parking storage issues, and it's really nice. So could you please develop a little bit on how this approach helps operators to address potential safety issues stemming from storage of aircraft? For example, taken as an example, the P2 probes obstruction. So how this concept is, let's say, anticipation, monitoring, and supporting, and the use of checklists can help the operators with those safety issues.
Yes. So first, when we receive few questions and we see an increase of similar topics, then we consider that this is not limited to one operator. Then we see that there's a wider issue in maybe a region. It could be a hot, humid region, could be a cold region. And based on that, we analyze it together with our SMS officers to say, okay, here we need to perform or to share some more information to warn the customer while returning to service in order to avoid issues at the first flight, so this non-revenue flight or the maintenance check flight, however you want to call it. And this is really done to have a safe flight or first flight after this long storage period or even short parking period. And what you mentioned with the airspeed probes, yes, there could be some insects inside. We are covering it, but sometimes after removal, even there could be within a day, you could have some objects inside. And all this with this checklist, all these warnings is done to support this safe first flight. Luis, are you still there?
Looks like Lewis has a connection problem. Hopefully he'll manage to join us back in a minute. I can see that occasionally we have these bandwidth problems. So while we wait for Lewis to be able to come back online, Raj, I'll share your presentation, and and then you can go through your presentation. That's fantastic. Give me 2 seconds. I'll just get it up online. There we go. Over to you, Raj.
Good morning, everybody from Amsterdam. Nice sunny weather and a beautiful view of the city. But yes, we have serious stuff. What they're gonna share with you. Next slide, please. A short introduction of the content. I'm gonna tell you something about the parking program, the timelines, the preparation phase, bringing the aircraft into a parking, and then the aircraft is really in parking, and then the return to service phase. And short introduction of myself, 30 years in aviation background, in engineering maintenance, done everything except engines, and the current position, director line maintenance. And my previous role was as a program director to be in charge of the parking and the storage program within KLM. Next slide, please. Yes, before we go to the parking program timeline, short introduction. We had generally 80% of our fleet we had on the ground at the home base Amsterdam at the airport. And the grounding of parking of the fleet affects engineering and maintenance as a maintenance organization in a couple of areas. First, the aircraft maintenance program was changed from flight hours into calendar days, so that's also affecting a lot of things. Second was that the scheduled maintenance checks for line and base maintenance checks, especially the A checks and the C check, we decided to continue based on calendar days. What we also saw was the shop visits for engines and components went down because there was no accumulation of hours and cycles. And also our organizations, due to change of workload and work scope, was changed also a little bit. What we did is we keep the organization as is, so we didn't change in the structure anything. What we saw was especially in line maintenance on the European fleet on the narrow body, that the flights were nearly brought to zero. So as I mentioned earlier, 80% of the fleet was on the ground, 20% was flying, and that was the 787 and the 777 fleet. So they were flying the international network with the cargo and without any passenger. The maintenance during storage and parking is required for a couple of reasons. First, operational, to keep the aircraft in an airworthy and serviceable and reliable condition. The second reason was the value retention of the equipment, because the current and the future value of the aircraft, by minimizing the physical deterioration of the aircraft, and of course the regularity requirements. So here is give you a view of the timeline for the 737 NG, what we use for the parking program. So after the last flight, the aircraft goes into a normal parking program, so for maximum 20 days. So it's mean you have to do your normal tasks, what you always are doing during a normal program. So after 20 days, we prepare the aircraft for active storage. Active storage means that we keep the aircraft in a flyaway condition. So, and that is something what was different than what initially was written by Boeing and Airbus about the fleet. In this case, I'm talking about the Boeing. If you go into a parking program, then you go into a prolonged parking program. It means you put the aircraft for a couple of time on the ground, and then you have to carry out a prolonged parking program, what is huge and immense. The goal of our parking program was quick fleet availability based on a network demand. The second thing was to ensure an airworthy fleet. Third thing was safe operation and a safety work environment for our staff and efficient and cost-effective program. So what you see here is again the timeline. So after normal parking, we will doing after every 7 days the engine rest, the APU usage, lubrication, aircraft cleaning and washing of aircraft, replacing of batteries more than 19 days. So we keep this going for a maximum of 180 days. Next slide, please. And the same with Airbus. The only difference between Airbus and Boeing is Airbus is talking about parking up to 1 month and parking more than 1 month. And again here, the preparation less than 1 month. Then after 7-day intervals, you have to do a couple of things, and then 15 days, and then preparation for more than one month interval. Next slide, please. Yes, the preparation phase. In the preparation phase, we had a lot of discussions with the OEMs and OEM, Boeing, Airbus, GE, and the biggest issues was deviation approval from the maintenance manual, the use of materials, the correct materials, because a lot of materials were not available in the market. So you had to go to alternate, and you had to make sure that all paperwork and everything was in place. And deviation from Boeing and Airbus was because we were working on a tailor-made program. The other biggest issue was the logistics, so availability of parking position at the airport. Normally, the airport is working with let's say slots and hubs. So you have a certain moment of time that you have maximum numbers of aircraft what the airport can handle in terms of runway capacity, but also parking spots or position where you can unload or load cargo or disembarking or embarking passengers. The other thing was towing, because there were too many aircraft on the ground and we were using all available spaces. So it had to quite logistic impact, because on some places on the airport you need to use wing walkers, prevent damages on aircraft, movement of ground equipment, because that was one thing. The second thing was the availability of ground equipment. If you can imagine, we have more than 200 aircraft parked at the same time, and you need for all aircraft you need, for example, external power units or other equipment. Also, the airport infrastructure was quite complex to all the traffic on the ground. So that makes that we started soon also to think about alternate parking fields in the EU and the US. The third thing was manpower. As I mentioned, we keep our organization as is. So line maintenance was doing line maintenance, base, and the shops and the support department doing the same things, except in line maintenance because of let's say the downgraded network. We use the staff from the narrow body fleet, and we use one part of it as a dedicated team who were in charge of doing all the maintenance tasks, so the execution of the parking program. What also was challenging was to clean all incoming defects of the fleet and also aircraft defects. So you want to put the aircraft in a parking position with 0 defects and 0 ADDs. And that's to prevent that you have to go to an extension process or you have to do ad hoc activities on the aircraft. The fourth big thing was communication, because internally we had to align everybody in the airline. Beside engineering and maintenance, also our CAMO organization, our flight operations, and also our corporate offices. And from the outside world, there were a lot of webinars about COVID, and also the IATA was organizing a lot of webinars about parking and safety and security things. And of course, the media, local but also international media, they had a lot of interest what was going on in the world of aviation. The fifth big thing what we were working on in the preparation phase was safety. So on safety side, we decided to do a SIRA. So that's a safety issue risk assessment. So that was from corporate level, and it goes to all the section what is involved in the whole parking program. So normally you think it's only the AMO organization, but it's also the operational organization like ground services who are doing the towing and moving on the ground of aircrafts, and also all the preparations what need to be done for them. So we did a SIRA assessment, and that was also with safety and departments, but also security, because some remote areas you had to look at it, the security risk. So we had to decide that on some places where it is dark in the night, we had to put additional cameras, additional lights, and all those things had to be done and was captured in our safety program covered by SIRA. Other thing was, and special on the Airbus fleet, we are creating a trouble because Airbus requires that you ground your aircraft at on a parking position if it stays longer than a certain amount of hours. So we had to install on several places on the airport ground aid points. So you have to drill a hole 100 meters into the earth, and to make sure that we had proper bounded the aircraft to earth points. And we were using one runway, so we closed one runway at Amsterdam Airport, and to prevent damages on the runway, we had to use steel plates to prevent that by point pressure of the tire we will get let's say bubbles into the asphalt of the runway. The other thing was fuel bowsers, and not for fueling the aircraft, but if you have contaminated fuel, then you have to remove that fuel, and then you have to the contaminated fuel, you have to disable it or destroy it to some special companies who were handling those contaminated fuel. I earlier mentioned security, of course, cameras, remote areas, additional lights in remote areas, and the regulator, of course, from the compliance side and also from the maintenance program side. So this was all done in the preparation phase. So in the preparation phase, we keep the aircraft in a parking position for maximum 20 days. Next slide, please. So bringing into parking, the first thing what I put here was a maintenance program. So we had internally a discussion, stop the clock. It's mean you stop everything doing on the aircraft and based on the maintenance program. And since we decide that we keep the aircraft in a fly away condition or in a flight condition, so we decided to do every 7 days, as mentioned in my previous sheets on the timelines, the maintenance program. The manpower, the number of staff related to COVID-19 restriction and execution of maintenance, that was also an exercise what we had to do. So we were working with small teams of 3 people, and especially on the 737 fleet, you cannot work with more than 3 people on one aircraft to prevent that that you have to keep on the COVID rules. And these dedicated teams, they took ownership. So they in the first weeks of bringing into parking, they had to discover a couple of things. The alternate materials, put the aircraft on a proper position, on steel plates, the equipment, and prevent that due to weather, wind, or whatever, damage can occur. Then the execution of maintenance, the fuel treatment chemicals, that was also an issue. Biobor was not allowed in the EU, so our team, who deals normally with government agency, they work together with some other airlines in the EU to get everything aligned, to get approval from the European Commission to import Biobor, because importing Biobor is not allowed in the EU, so we had to go for a special waiver to have that available. Also, the alternate method to measure fuel contamination by using fuel samples. You can imagine more than 200 aircraft, everyday fuel samples. All those samples has to go through by transport to our laboratory, and they have to test the fuel, and then you have to wait for the results. And if there are contamination, then you have to take action. What also was playing part with the weather conditions, of course. The COVID started in January here in Europe, and so February was winter, March was winter. So you can imagine draining fuel in a freezing environment is not really helpful. And then you have to find the steel plates. So we have to organize with some companies outside Amsterdam to get the correct steel plates or alternate plates to prevent damage on the runway. The other thing was the local restriction and regulations. So the local community in terms of running APU, for example, at position where it was normally where it was not allowed to park aircraft, we were parking our aircraft because there was no place. So then you had to go to the whole process of getting all the approvals or waivers to run, for example, APU because of the noise violations. Then the location position to execute maintenance tasks, because not every remote area was accessible to do maintenance, because you could not get steps on that place or equipment. So you had to tow the aircraft back to a position where you can do maintenance. Logistics was also a big challenge, towing the number of aircraft, ground equipment, the infrastructure, as I mentioned. Of course, safety and the alternate fields. We choose a field in the Netherlands, Groningen Airport on the north of Netherlands. So we had to start also a program to ferry flights those aircraft, and also to move the dedicated team from Amsterdam to Groningen Airport. And at Groningen Airport, what's normally low utilized airports, we're getting a lot of, in this case, 737 and Airbus aircraft. So we had to also do some additional security requirements. So it's mean installing of additional cameras, lights, and everything what need to be put in place to make sure that you can do normal maintenance, but also return to service, that you can do all the activities. Simple things like de-icing, because we were rotating aircraft from the parking field at Groningen to Amsterdam. So every 20 days, we did a ferry flight of the 737 back to Amsterdam, and that aircraft went back into our network. So we were rotating our fleet. And of course, communication internally, externally. Next one. So in parking, this give you a view in parking. This is at Groningen Airport, where we put our 737 fleet and A330 fleet. So the big advantage was a dedicated team. So they were really expert in parking and putting aircraft in parking, and also with the local rules and regulation in relation to environment. We did also the management of change. So it's meaning you have to do the CIRA assessment, safety, security, and occupational safety to be in compliance. So we had also the Dutch CAA who did an audit of a whole day to check how we're working, what we're doing, and how everything is in place. And of course, communication, a lot of media attention, and the execution of maintenance, idle runs, service checks, and that's in combination of the weather condition, because we had the biggest hangar of the world, the open sky, and yes, that gives also some challenges. And we had to also look for damages and building of birds' nest in the aircraft. And one thing what we were not doing is cover the engine inlets and the exhaust, because since we were doing every 7 days an engine run, and the dedicated team were inspecting every day the aircrafts on damages and check if there are animals or birds or insects in the wheel well or in the engine intakes. And the pitot and the static ports, of course, were covered, and the APU exhaust was also covered. Next one, please. And then return to service. Hangar slots was an issue. Logistic, on the picture on the right hand side, you see a damage what occurs a wing of during towing, a winglet of A330 hit 747 section 41. So we had a heavy damage on that nose of that aircraft. Airport infrastructure was also a big challenge. Procedures, execution of maintenance, bringing back to service all the AMM instructions and procedures was quite heavy. And we were working in the hangar as always with dedicated teams, so that makes that things were going very smooth. And on the safety side, the PTOs and the static ports obstructions, so special inspection, and also bird or insect nesting. And of course, the ferry flight, the return flight back to home base was involved. And one of the things what we also decided during the beginning of the whole parking program was that cannibalization of an aircraft what was in a parking phase or in a parking program was not allowed. So removing or loaning parts of that aircraft or engine was totally not allowed. So it was totally sealed off. So nobody was allowed to remove any single part of the aircraft. And the beauty of this whole parking program was that we made it tailor-made with Boeing and Airbus and the OEMs and the regulator. It took some time, but once everybody was convinced, then we had the green light to do that. And that gives us the opportunity that we were able to to put the aircraft very fast back into service as demanded by our network. Next one. Thank you, and happy to see you on board in one of our aircrafts. And if you have questions, I will get from you.
Okay, thank you, Raj. It was a very interesting presentation with very practical information on parking, storage, and return to service. So, from your point of view, and as a large operator of aircraft, and based on your experience, what are the most critical safety issues in the process of returning to service storage or parked aircraft? Do you agree with Swan that follow-up is the key to successful storage?
Now, the biggest thing is on safety, especially with parking, is the whole logistics. Because that is normally you are not doing this. Normally you are at an airport, you are in a quite organized environment, so everything is in place. You go back to the ramp, and now we are using every square meter of ramp. So that had a huge safety issue. From the maintenance side, the biggest challenge was the alternates. Because covers, pitot covers. So in the first week, the whole world was searching for pitot covers. So we decided to fabricate pitot covers by ourselves. But you need to go for the formal approval from the OEM to get that fabricated locally cover approved. So then you come in a very, let's say, tax office environment discussion. And that is one thing. And on the execution side, I think what we learned and what worked very well was dedication, ownership of engineers, and that prevents a lot of. And the third thing, what helped to keep a safe operation during the return to service is, if an aircraft is in a parking condition, do not touch anything or remove anything. Because cannibalization is so easy, because you have one spare aircraft, and spare aircraft mean a spare store of materials. So just leave it, because you will forget a hose or line or whatever, and then and if somebody did not record that properly, you will get in trouble, and that effect you will see on the return to server or the first flight. And the fourth thing, number 4, is this whole biobore process. So once you have contamination in your fuel tank, read 3 times the procedure before you do anything, because if you make a mistake, then you add more biobore instead of you had to do less. And more biobore means it creates different problems, and it can, if you not follow proper the procedure, you can end in a flame out or whatever. So those things is very critical.
Yeah. Okay, thank you very much, Raj. So we have a couple of questions from the audience, and as I promised, maybe I will go through them. So I think this is the first one is for David, because and it is as follows: what was the decision-making process that led to the decision of low authorization versus storage or parking? David, for you.
Okay. Yeah. The decision at the time, it was a very difficult one. We first went into prolonged parking twice, and during that time we reviewed to see, could we adapt our business model, our customer base? Did we have the opportunity to establish enough revenue work? Our type of aircraft, freight on seat, is not viable, so we missed that wave. So the sales team, the other organization team, were positive that we could move into a different market segment inside of our existing scope and approvals, which we did successfully. And really driving that was on the background the fear of, if we don't do this and this goes for 1 or 2 years, will we be able to restart? we will have such a proficiency loss in all departments and all avenues. If an organization of our size, yeah, that might be a different decision that would have to be made.
Okay, thank you, David. So next one, maybe to Raj. How did you motivate your teams during pandemic times? What is the most effective method?
The most effective method is to communication in what are you doing. So there is a lot of happening on the, let's say, on the background. So share with people what's going on. So since I was in charge of the whole parking and storage program, so we're with our corporate communication, we communicate frequently with all engineers and mechanics, but also in the supporting area. What are we doing? Why we choose a certain decision? Because a lot of engineers said, yeah, but everything is written in the maintenance manual, so go take the maintenance manual, print it, and do the prolonged parking. No, guys, we have to think smart. We have to think lean, and communication was key in this, and also involvement of people. With the restrictions what we had because of COVID, so we try to communicate through Teams or WebEx or whatever, but also with keep distance. We inform people in small groups, face to face, and that helps a lot.
Okay, thank you, Raj. So this one is for Airbus, for Amelie. So how did Airbus deal with the clock stoppage issues of our time interval in maintenance program?
Well, we have issued information letter on that for the let's say deferment of maintenance action during the parking and storage periods. It's common industry way of working not to perform the maintenance actions during the storage period, whereby due tasks are performed before returning to service. And for the hard time interval, if I well understood, it's the calendar time. So saying that, so the recommendation is in general to perform the due task at return to service, and so not at the due date during the parking or storage period.
Okay, thank you, Melly. So I have another question. Maybe this goes for Icelander. So what have you put into place for a return to work program for engineering staff? Oh.
Hi there. So we have been definitely keeping busy with all kinds of projects. We have been modifying aircrafts through the DOI license, and we took part of the freight in seat, as David mentioned, back and forth to China. So we have been doing a lot of engineering work, preparing for service again. So we have not felt that we needed to especially train the engineers. Mechanics on the other side, we were taking the 737 MAX back to service, so we have been training people on the 737 MAX specifically. Yeah.
Okay, thank you, Svein. Thank you very much. We have one more question, and then I think we have to finish afterwards. Let me say that we will try to answer all questions posed here in the question and answer tab. So this is a kind of a complicated question because so I will read it. So the aircraft designers designed the aircraft for continued use, and I guess they know what parts are designed for continued use. So did you get information on all parts that should be used continuously and how to maintain them in this period of not being used? Or did you identify other parts that needed attention because of not being used? So it's a little bit complex question. So maybe I will ask Raj first place. Maybe all of you can give some insight of this with regards to this question. But can I start with Raj about it? So the issue is about the continued use or the design of certain parts that are designed for continuous use, and how do you address the issue?
So what we did is that's the reason what we were doing. We keep the aircraft, let's say, in a flight condition. So we were powering the aircraft on every 7 days. So we run the engines, the APU, power all system, and that is how we keep things alive.
So basically, you didn't felt too much that problem of because you were keeping alive. Let's call it that.
Life, yeah. So we want to prevent, and a good example is on the 737 there was an AD on a valve on the engine, you know, and it happens I think in the US or somewhere else in the world that after takeoff that valve stay closed. So it's very fast. The FAA came with an AD requirement, so everybody, including ourselves, had to inspect the system. And because since we were doing that engine run every 7 days, we have zero findings on the valves, on the specific valves, and that was the reason that we decide, to do every 7 days that the powering of the aircraft and engines. And so one side it costs you money, but the benefits on the other side, and special for the rapid, let's say, return to service, it brings more value.
If I may comment as well.
Yes, Melly, please.
So that's the reason we have two different programs. So on the one hand, the parking to keep the aircraft in flight ready condition, as Raj just mentioned. So you are using really all the topics or all the systems within a week or bi-weekly on a monthly basis, and that is keeping the systems alive somehow. Whereby on the storage program, we have a heavy induction and then a heavy return to service package, where you have lubrication, where you have specific tests, and then over there we make sure that all the systems are used prior returning to service. That's why you can consider all the systems as safe, and that's the basis how the parking and storage checks have been developed within the AMM Chapter 10.
Okay, thank you, Melly. Any comments from David or Sven on this question specifically?
Rachel, I want to add something. What was also helping us was the ferry flight. Every 20 days, we had a ferry flight from Groningen to Amsterdam. It's a short flight, 20 minutes. But because of that flight, every systems and also the gears and everything were working properly. Yeah, and used, of course. Yeah.
Okay, so Sven, David, any additional comments?
Yeah, I comment. Yeah, we basically looked at the aircraft in Poland parking were basically asleep. So of course we did the required revisiting the aircraft as required by the manual, and occasionally we treated aircraft in active storage, and then we did the run-ups and activation and so on. So we did a different approach, definitely, and it worked out. In the end, it worked out good.
Okay, thank you, Sven. So David, any?
Yeah, I can. My only comments, I can only concur with Raj's position. We went prolonged parking as well. Our programs mirror each other quite well, with aircraft-specific differences. Again, through the attention and overemphasis on certain tasks where we were sensitive to bleed valves hanging or sticking. So we increased, voluntarily increased the AMP tasks to things that we perceived as potential threats during the prolonged parking.
Thank you very much, David. We have a little bit of time now. So I just want to kind of recap a little bit of the session. So starting with you, David, you introduced the 5R patterns addressing COVID-19 situation. Was very interesting. Svein spoke about the need of multiple adaptations of the aircraft maintenance procedures and follow-up being the key of a successful storage. Melly explained how Airbus set up a team to ensure smooth return to service based on anticipation using in-service experience, monitoring, using feedback, and identifying any developing issue, and supporting with introduction of the return to service checklist. Raj brought to us the extensive experience due to the big fleet that KLM has. So as key message, I think the first thing, okay, a little bit for us, use the resources made available by EASA, because I think you can find a lot of material that will help you in this phase. And as David was saying, make COVID the opportunity to introduce and improve process, training efficiencies, and safety promotion inside and outside of the organizations. So thank you very much to all. Back to you, John. So I transfer the floor to John.
Fantastic. Thanks, Lewis, and huge thanks from me also to all our panelists. I think they were really interesting, practical conversations and discussions. Particularly just to maybe a couple of things to mention. So there were questions and things that were raised that we didn't get to. So we'll take those and save those and use them to create some additional promotion material. There were some really interesting points. There was one from somebody talking about challenges they've had with wasps' nests in the pitot systems, which I think was quite an interesting one, particularly. And one of the things, actually, it came up a little bit as well in the AirOps session yesterday, was about the link between different departments in an airline, particularly, or in an organisation, where, for example, if you've got an aircraft coming immediately out of storage, there was Pascal Kramer from Luxair talked about certain situations where you might not necessarily want to give an aircraft that was coming out of storage to a crew who hadn't necessarily flown before, and it's that, or flown for a long time. So it's kind of that risk management across the different parts of the organisation that's particularly important, and that's come across a lot during the different sessions, is the kind of integrated safety management system approach being so important in this time. So huge thanks. As I say, we'll be posting, Jean-Pierre just dropped into the chat there the link to where all of the materials available, and we'll upload the recordings and stuff onto the ramp up pages, particularly the CAMO part of the ramp up campaign pages on the community site tomorrow. So that will be available. We'll drop an email to everybody, to all the participants, potentially either tomorrow or Monday, to let you know where everything is. So huge thanks for your time. Huge thanks to the panelists. We've got our final session to sum up a bit, and particularly on safety, leadership and communication, this afternoon at 1400 Central European Time. We'll be accepting any further registrations up until 30 minutes before. So thanks very much. Goodbye from here in Cologne for now, and bye-bye.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Goodbye.
Bye-bye. Thank you very much to all of you guys. So